Welcome to Building the Basics, where we walk you through the why, what, and how of gun ownership.
In this episode, we'll be talking about all things concealed carry. So before we get into the discussion, though, we want to make sure that we disclose none of what we're about to say is going to be legal advice. We do not claim to be lawyers. We don't want to steer anybody wrong. We will try our best to provide you the best information that we have. And at the same time, we do also strongly encourage that if this is something that you want to entertain doing, that you check out all of your local, state, and understand what the federal laws are related to carrying concealed. So, Marvin, take it away.
So, I guess the first thing is, what is CCW? What does that acronym actually stand for? If I can speak, so CCW stands for Concealed Carry Weapon. It is the stand-in for the permit that most people get in their state if it's required, or whatever their locality might be. But to call out, today we have, I think it's 26 states that have constitutional carry, which means you don't have to get a CCW in order to carry a gun in that state. I know that in some states you can still get your CCW. I think in all states you could probably still get your CCW in a constitutional carry state, just so that you can take advantage of reciprocity in states where there may not be a CCW. And reciprocity meaning that your permit in your home state is recognized by another state that you might be traveling to, and making you a lawful CCW carrier that is permitted in a state that you're traveling to outside of a constitutional carry state.
So real quick, Marvin, so we're actually up to 29 states that have constitutional carries.
Oh my gosh.
Back in March of 2024, we got Louisiana and South Carolina are on board with permit-free carry.
Oh, fantastic. I did not know that, and that is very cool to know. I mean, constitutional carry, especially for people who may be traveling to other states, that makes it very easy for you, and you don't have to worry about, hey, would I be legally permitted to carry a self-defense firearm when I'm there. So
one thing real quick, Marvin. So this is just a perfect example of how laws can and do change, and why it is so important to be a well-informed citizen of not only the country, but of your individual state. So you have, the 29, like we mentioned, that have constitutional carry. The 21 that do not adds up to the 50 states in the union. So, yeah, just continue to emphasize why it is important to have knowledge of what's going on in the country and in your state. So
awesome, yeah, absolutely. We want to make sure that everybody has the ability to defend themselves at the end of the day. That is the one thing that we all should be able to engage in without fear of running afoul of the law. So I guess that leads us into our first topic, which is why concealed carry. Why would somebody want to conceal a weapon on their body? For me, I think there are a couple of reasons, right? You don't know what's going on out there. There are a lot of people who act irrationally and may, in some instances, pose a mortal threat to you or your family. And so having a concealed carry firearm ensures that you have the best tool to stop that threat, especially as a husband and as a father myself. Those are things that I'm always thinking about is, hey, am I ensuring that I'm keeping my family safe when we're out and about? Obviously not going to areas that might be dangerous, or high crime areas, or getting into verbal or physical altercations with other people. Those are kind of givens in my opinion, but you just never know. And, it's kind of, in my opinion, it's kind of like wearing a seat belt or having a fire extinguisher underneath my kitchen sink. I'm hoping that I never ever need to use or rely on those things, but in the event that I do, I have it, and more than for myself, it is for my family.
Yeah, Marvin, for me, it just harkens back to what we talked about in our first episode. There's the right to self-defense. There's the right to protect yourself, to protect your family. Now, at the same time, this is an immense responsibility that you need to really weigh upon yourself and say, yeah, is this something that I want to do, that I want to take on, that I want to bear that, right? So it's a decision that you yourself have to make. But a rhetorical question, of course, is would you rather have the skills and the training and the ability to protect yourself or your family if needed? And that's, like I said, that's only a question that you can answer. But again, this goes back to training. There's plenty of training that is out there that focuses on concealed carry. So you got plenty of options. There's also just normal training at your range. There's also, as funny as it sounds, I mean, you can also get into the competition shooting realm that we talked about last episode. There's a lot that you can identify in terms of skill sets that need to be improved, or things that you need to consider when you're doing your own training. So there's a lot of good resources out there, and as always, training is such a key part of this. So
and I think to touch back on that concept of self-defense is for everybody is. People are of different statures, different weights, different capabilities, and there are plenty of instances where there may be a 300-pound man who wants to attack a 100-pound woman. She has no chance of defending herself against that individual absent a firearm. It is the great equalizer. You could be an 85-year-old, grandfather with arthritis, and you would be able to defend yourself against an attacker that is 3-4 times your size, your weight, who's 20, 30, 40 years younger than you are. I think that's the big piece of it in my mind when it comes to self-defense. It is the great equalizer, and it is incumbent upon every person who decides to become a firearms owner, who wants to carry concealed, to be the most responsible and the best trained to their personal situation and ability, to ensure that they have that ability to defend against somebody who knows, is that person an MMA fighter who's just looking to punch somebody to death, right? A normal person wouldn't stand a chance against that without a firearm. And so I just think about situations like that, and how often we read in the news, right? Somebody who is physically disadvantaged against an attacker, and the attacker, was able to get away with it because that the weaker person had no ability to defend themselves. So, and so I think that kind of leads us into the next topic, which is what is proper CCW. I look at it from a mindset, a posture, an approach standpoint, and so when I'm talking about the mindset, and Jim, you talked about it, was avoiding conflict. This is our last resort. This isn't something that, hey, somebody's injured my pride, or somebody's looking to pick a shoving match, or whatever the case is. Somebody's touched me accidentally. I'm going to pull my firearm now. I think the mindset has to be, this is a serious enough situation where when I'm pulling a firearm, one of the major outcomes, a great potential, would be for ending somebody's life, and we shouldn't approach ending somebody's life lightly.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing is there's so many misconceptions nowadays of what concealed carry looks like and what it means. And like, there's people out there that'll say things like, oh, that guy, he's only carrying a gun so that he can feel like a real man. Or this guy, he's carrying a gun so that, he can feel safe because he has a gun on his hip, or this guy he's looking for trouble because he's carrying a gun. It's like, no, I would argue the vast majority, the significant majority of people who carry a gun for concealed carry purposes, all they want to do at the end of the day is they want to get home, and they want to get home safe. And if they have a family, they want to get home to their family.
Yeah. Oh, and I think there are people out there who have a negative mindset. People who go out there who say, hey, this makes me a real man, or, I'm going out there and I'm going to take down bad guys, or whatever the case is. But I think people with that mindset are far and few in between. And, I think
right,
as responsible gun owners, we need to combat that mindset and spread as much knowledge about what an appropriate mindset should be for responsible gun owner and concealed carry permit holder, or if you're in a constitutional carry state, just a responsible gun owner who is carrying out in public would be engaging in. So with that, moving into posture, there are things that we can do from a posture standpoint to make sure that we are both as responsible as possible as well as efficient as possible, because from a concealed carry standpoint, efficiency is the key, right? You want to be able to draw that weapon as quickly and as efficiently as possible, so that if you're engaging a threat, you can actually engage that threat before it becomes an issue for you, or before you are injured, or before you are in a position where you are unable to produce that firearm to mitigate the risk or the imminent dangerous situation. So from a posture standpoint, first things first is, are you putting yourself in a situation where you are more likely or less likely to have to produce your concealed weapon? So if you are concealed carry, go ahead.
It's like, it's like, if you're, how smart are you with, going down that dark alley, right? Like, you're not going to be going down a dark alley in a bad part of a neighborhood or a bad part of a city, by yourself at night at 3 a.m. It's just, no, you're not going to do that. So you want to make sure that you're traveling in places that make sense to travel to. Or like, if there's a shortcut and you're like, oh, I can go down this shortcut at 2 a.m. You might want to take a long way around if it's a little bit safer, right? Like, you just want to keep it in a logical sense. You don't want to go in, like we said, you don't want to go into it as, oh, I have my gun on me, that means that I can do whatever I want. Not even remotely in the slightest is that what you should be thinking. It is there, as we have said, and we will continue to say, it is there as a last resort if you are in a position where you are required to produce it in order to defend your life.
Absolutely. And along with that would be, taking stock of how you're dressed, where you're going. Am I going into a high crime area? And am I wearing an expensive watch? Am I wearing expensive sneakers? Are those things that might make me a target? We've talked about lowering our own personal profiles and making us an undesirable victim for people. And in a couple episodes back, we talked about home defense and what we can do to kind of mitigate that. And we can do that personally as well from our day-to-day, not just making our homes less of a target of opportunity. We can make ourselves less of a target of opportunity by ensuring that we are aware of our surroundings, aware of how we're dressed, keeping awareness as we're moving about in public. And so that leads me into the next section of posture, which would be, knowing what, where you can carry, what places you're going to. There are going to be a lot of times where you're going into a city, a town, a building, where they just say, no guns allowed. We don't allow concealed carry. The appropriate thing would be, hey, I know that I'm going into this place, and I'm not going to name any private institution, but say you're going to a federal courthouse. you know you got to go to a federal courthouse the next day. Don't carry your gun that day. Just go to the courthouse. You can't carry it in there anyway, and don't risk it, and don't leave it in your car. I think a lot of times people will go to places where firearms are prohibited, and they're like, oh, well, I'll just leave it in my car. I'll just put it under the car seat or whatever the case is. And I think personally, I think that is something that I don't believe should be done. I don't believe that a firearm should ever be left in cars. Cars are broken into very frequently, and it's an extra bonus for a bad guy if he's like, hey, score, I got a free car, and oh sweet, I got a sweet new gun. And so that's just my personal approach. And then if you're going someplace where you don't necessarily know whether or not a firearm is allowed, which I do sometimes, I just do a quick Google search. Hey, is this place some place that they don't allow firearms? Is the organization that runs this business or venue or whatever the case is, do they not allow guns? Are they anti-gun? Whatever the case might be. Okay, so I won't carry my gun, and if I'm going out, I'll go there, and then I'll come back, and then if I have other things to do, I will come back home. I will then holster my firearm on my person, and then I'll go back out to all the places that I know where I would be allowed to be carrying.
Yeah, and for just a little bit of statistics here, do some of your own research as well, because, depending on different news sources and such, you might get slightly different numbers here and there or slightly different years. But using some round numbers here, over 110,000 guns were reported stolen in 2022, and just over half of those were stolen from cars. So, Marvin, to your point of what you're saying is that's a perfect reason of why you don't want to leave your gun in your car. Half of the guns that were reported stolen in 2022 were from cars, right? So there are those times where stolen guns have been used in tragic events. I personally couldn't imagine what would happen if a gun that I owned that was mine was used in a tragic incident, right? So I would not want to have that on my soul, right? So it's a horrible thing to think of, and just strongly encourage anybody who is listening to not have that be their reality in that situation, right? So don't leave your gun in your car where it has the ability to get stolen. People can break in, and those guns aren't being used, stolen and then taken to the range. It just boils down to you want to make sure that you're a responsible gun owner. So let's talk about platforms now. It sounds like we have a pretty easy ability to rule out a few things of what you can and cannot carry. So what do you think?
It seems kind of obvious to some folks, but I mean, there are a lot of people who may be going out and buying their first firearm and going, hey, yeah, I'm going to get a rifle. Why not concealed carry? Well, it's
because you can't.
Because you can't.
It's just not possible.
I mean, unless you are wearing a trench coat all the time, and that's going to probably get you in a lot more trouble than just buying a pistol. So, the most probably universally, the platform for concealed carry would be a pistol. And so there are a lot of different pistols that you can buy from a sizing standpoint. But we'll run through some of those. I think I've concealed carry pretty much every pistol size, and I've got my own personal preferences. But the most common pistol sizes would be a full size, a compact, subcompact, and a micro compact. So, Jimmy, you want to run through some of the more common platforms or models and brands that people might be familiar with for each one of the sizes?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm going to do is I'll mention some of the brands and then some of the models that are within those brands that people will recognize. So for example, you have full size, which is the Glock 17 and SIG P226. For compact, there's the Glock 19 and SIG P229. And then subcompact, it goes a little bit into a couple of different variations. So, for example, there's the Glock 43, which is a single stack, and that just means that all of the rounds are in a vertical row versus the double stack magazines, which are kind of staggered throughout the magazine, which makes the magazine wider. So yeah, so single stack, you have the Glock 43, then double stack, a couple examples are the Glock 26 and the SIG P224. Now the interesting piece is that SIG also has the P320 model, and that comes in different sizes. So for example, you can get the P320 in a full size compact. Older models, you could get it in a subcompact. So there's different variations that you can get with that. And like I said, these are just examples, right? More commonplace, people are able to recognize those very easily just because of their prevalence. Not to say they're the best or the worst or anything like that, just a very prevalent list of models that I just listed out. Marvin, anything that I'm missing or that you might want to touch on?
No, I think you've captured that pretty well with those particular items. And then micro compact.
Yeah, so this is actually kind of a fun one because here's a different example of micro compact. So the SIG P938, that is a 1911 style, which is a single action only. There's an external safety, which some people like, but it's a very, very, very compact gun, and it is very easily concealable, and it's actually very versatile in where you can carry it. So it's a fun little gun that you can use for a whole slew of purposes. Like I said, in terms of like where you carry it. So it's a fun little guy. But like we have said before, everything's a compromise and everything's a trade-off, and there's positives and negatives that you have to take into consideration too.
Yeah. Well, and some of the more popular micros that people might see out there would be like the Taurus GX4, the Ruger Max 9, the Smith & Wesson M&P Shield Plus. Really popular out there would be the Springfield Armory Hellcat, Springfield Hellcat. I know a lot of people have purchased that one, and so there are a lot of different micro compacts that are out there for all different price points. But
then there's the SIG P365, which originally came out as a micro compact pistol, and they have very different variations. There's a P365X, XL, macro, and then they just released their Fuse not too long ago as well. So all different flavors and sizes of that one model. So it gives a whole lot of different versatility and variability depending on what the owner wants to do. So it's really cool to see what they have there. And then this whole conversation doesn't even take into consideration revolvers, which is a whole other thing. Also another option that you can consider when carrying concealed. So there's something for everybody, whether you want to carry a micro compact all the way up to a full size. We just want to illustrate that, yeah, there's something for everybody.
Just to give everybody a reference, when we're talking about full size, compact, subcompact, micro compact, the big differentiator between the two, and really what makes something a full size, compact, subcompact, micro compact, would be the barrel length. So for barrel lengths, of a full size pistol would be somewhere in the range of 4.5 to potentially 5 inches for a full size gun. For a compact, it would be around 4 inches, 3.9 inches, 4 inches is around the would be around the size of a compact pistol. A subcompact would be 3.5 inches. And then at micro compact, we're talking 3.1 to sub, but normally they're going to be about 3.1 to just like 2.9 inch long barrel. And so the trade-offs, as Jim was just talking about, would be your ability to conceal carry that. How comfortable is it to carry something with 4.5, 5 inch barrel versus something that only has a 3-inch barrel. I mean, the 2 inches makes a huge difference in terms of comfort if you're trying to sit down, if you're trying to bend over. And then Jim was also talking about double stack versus a single stack magazine. That's basically tells you how thick that gun is. And so, the more bullets you're going to get, the thicker that gun's going to be, or the longer the grip of that gun is going to be. And so the trade-off there would be, again, comfort. So, something that is a lot thicker, trying to put that into your pants. There's a comfort element to that, but there's also a concealability element to it, right? The whole point of a concealed carry weapon permit, a CCW, is the concealed part. And so I think a lot of people initially don't consider that, or they're optimistic about it. And so one thing that you're going to hear a lot about out there would be the term printing. And printing is basically what it kind of sounds like do you have an imprint of that gun through your shirt, through your pants? Can somebody see that you are carrying a gun on you? If there are people that are nervous around firearms, and so that you're going to visibly make those people nervous. There are also bad guys out there who may want to take that from you. And so, if you're a bad guy and you're looking to do bad things, wouldn't you want to know who had a gun around you, and potentially take that person out, neutralize the threat of the person with a gun first? Or if you're a bad guy and you're like, you know what, I think I can take that guy. I think I can take that gun away from him and get myself a free new gun, right? And so number of reasons why you would not want to print and, basically broadcast that you have a firearm on you. Thoughts, Jim? Anything else that I might have missed?
I think the important piece here is knowing, again, what the laws in your area are, because there are some areas that are a little bit more restrictive when it comes to having that printing. Like, they can call it brandishing because you are maybe unintentionally displaying that you have a firearm on your person. So just something to consider. And here's the other thing. Like, we're not telling you about, oh my gosh, you need to now change your entire wardrobe, or you need to, dress a certain way in order to carry concealed. We're not saying that. We're saying you should be aware of how your style is, for dress. You should be aware of how that pistol will look on your person. And taking all that into consideration, we'll get into this in a probably about 5-10 minutes or so, is the differences between carry positions on your person. So you'll have inside the waistband and outside the waistband, and then there's a few different terminologies of where on your body will be options that you can consider. So that's the biggest thing that I'll say for that. Just kind of being mindful of what does printing and brandishing, what kind of impact could that have on you?
I think that's an important thing to consider. It's something that I've become more aware of as I'm carrying is the clothing that I wear. There is the joke in the firearms community about winter carry, right? Oh man, I can break out my winter carry now because it is winter time.
But it's so true though. Like, it really is. There's so much more that you can carry in a wintertime. You're wearing a hoodie, you're going to be able to carry a full size a whole lot easier than, summertime with like, a t-shirt and, a pair of shorts.
Absolutely.
Right? It's just,
yeah.
It's so true. And
well,
it's a fact.
And it's another thing is like, hey, like, everybody's got their own style, how tight are your shirts, right? Like, are you, am I going to be tucking my shirt in? Am I not going to be tucking my shirt in? What kind of pants am I wearing? I mean, skinny jeans are all the rage, but I mean, I'll tell you, I do not wear my skinny jeans out if I am going to be carrying a weapon. They're not super comfortable anyway, and I only got like one or two pairs, but that's not something that some people may think about. Is that, hey, I've got jeans on that are, one, it's just incredibly uncomfortable to carry a gun in, and then two, hey, am I just printing the heck out of this firearm that I'm carrying? And so, clothing and time of year, there is a trade-off in terms of the size of the gun, a barrel length, double stack, single stack. I think another big trade-off that a lot of folks probably don't consider would be shootability. A lot of people go out there and they're like, oh man, I want to get a micro compact. I want to get the thing that I can just stick in a pocket, or, it feels like I'm not wearing a gun at all. And that is super, super nice. I've been in situations where I've carried a micro compact and it's been like, oh yeah, this is super comfortable. But the trade-off there would be shootability. How well can I shoot that gun? Yeah. How well can I put rounds on target, downrange, with the weapon that I've got? The other thing is if I'm carrying a micro compact, I get far fewer bullets. And so if I'm going from, say, a 17 round magazine with a Glock 17 or a SIG P226, and now I'm down to 8 rounds, 9 rounds, 10 rounds, then that is definitely a big trade-off for comfort when you're considering the size of firearm that you're going to be carrying as you're walking out of the house.
Yeah, that's a really important point, Marvin. You have that example that I used earlier, that Mini 1911, for example, that I said, the 938. I mean, I think that's only a 6 or 7 round capacity magazine. So you stack that up against a SIG P320, which is 21 rounds or 17 rounds, depending on what magazine you have, or a 15 round Glock 19. I mean, it's a huge difference, right? And if you're ever in a situation where you need to engage a threat, I mean, that could be the difference of getting home alive or not. And I don't mean to be morbid, but it is a fact. It could be a difference maker.
Yeah, and how well are you shooting that, right? So I mean, if you have a gun that's uncomfortable to shoot, and I will say that most micro compacts are not fun to shoot. They just aren't. They've got more kick. You've got to grip it harder. They're snappier. How likely are you going to be going to the range more often to gain greater proficiency over that firearm, so that you, when the time comes, or if the time comes for you to actually pull that trigger, how well can you get those rounds on target? I think that's a really big piece for me, is, aside from the comfort piece of it, aside from, how many rounds I'm getting, is how well can I shoot it? So for me, like I said, I've run the gamut. I've carried full size, I've carried compact, I've carried subcompacts, micro compacts, and, I think that most of the time I'm like, hey, I'm not going to carry a micro compact. It's a compact or a subcompact at most, and I'll figure out what I need to do to make sure that I'm comfortable carrying that thing. Is it the holster that I'm wearing? Is it the clothes that I'm wearing? Do I have to be choiceful about the pants, the belt, whatever the case might be?
Yeah, and I'm gonna say, I've said it once already, but everything's a trade-off. I mean, there's going to be a healthy balance of, what's the comfort level of the actual like carrying piece, and what's my comfort level of shooting that gun, right? So there's, like you said, Marvin, there's going to be something that you're going to have to trade off. Maybe not. Maybe you'll have that gun that fits you perfectly, and it fits you perfectly in terms of shooting and in terms of where it is aligned on your body for carrying. So anything's possible. It's just keep in mind that when you're making this purchase, you may have to have a very slight trade-off if you're if you're looking to carry concealed.
Yep, absolutely. And so I guess that let's talk about the next biggest point of compromise that that people have to make is whether they're going to be carrying 380 versus 9 millimeter, or maybe 45. So my personal thoughts on carrying would be 9 millimeter. 9 millimeter ammunition technology has come an incredibly long way since like the 1980s and the 1990s. You can kind of get all sorts of different performance at all different bullet weights, grain weights, and so for me, 45 doesn't make a lot of sense when we're talking about quote, and these are really heavy air quotes, is knockdown power, right? You hear a lot of people talk about knockdown power. I want to carry 45 because it'll knock the guy down. These ideas of somebody getting blown out of their shoes, or getting knocked across the room, or falling down because you shot them, like that's not reality. And so what we're really talking about is how well does that round dump the energy into the target so that they are stopped, right? Whether they are stopped physically, whether they are stopped by blood loss, whether whatever the case might be, you want that round to dump all of its energy, and a subsequent effect of that, which is also very important, is that round does not pass through your target and endanger other bystanders. And so, with that being said, I think 9 millimeter. There's so many great defensive rounds out there that do a great job of dumping energy, opening up, and not passing through your the intended target. I think makes 9 millimeter the choice that I make when purchasing defensive ammo. I think 380 is a close second. I think the issue is that the amount of energy that 380 has versus 9 millimeter makes it the big trade-off there, right? So 380 is somewhere in the neighborhood of 40% less energy than a 9 millimeter round of equivalent type of load, meaning it's a jacketed hollow point plus P load. And so that means that the 380 has less energy that it's imparting into the target. But the positive side of the trade-off for 380 would be that it has a lot less recoil. And so it's a lot more accurate. And if you need to fire multiple rounds, you would be able to do so with greater accuracy. And so I think that is one of the big things that a lot of people need to consider. And you're going to get all sorts of opinions out there. And these are ours. These are the choices that we make, in terms of carry. But 380 or 9 millimeter. I prefer 9 millimeter due to technology. 380 would be something that I would recommend, for somebody who may not have as much time at the range, in physically mitigating recoil or getting that muscle memory to mitigate that recoil.
And I'll differ from Marvin. I'll say 9 millimeter is my personal recommendation and preference. I don't like 380. I think anybody should be able to, unless there's some sort of physical limitation. Of course, there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. I'm speaking to the vast majority. If there is a choice between 380 and 9 millimeter, I'm going to say go with 9 millimeter. We've been really stressing classes. We've been really stressing getting instruction. I would say if you are on the fence, go take a class. Go make sure that you're getting hands-on training of shooting a 9 millimeter pistol, and from there you'll be able to work on your grip, work on your stance, work on your presentation of the gun to the target. You'll be working on your trigger pull, and you'll be learning how to mitigate that recoil. I think all of that said, you'll be very comfortable shooting a 9mm. I think with the different grain weights that are out there, there's going to be something that will work for you. And given the different barrel lengths that we've spoken about already, we did mention that the smaller barrels will have a little bit more kick to it just because of how the design is with that smaller barrel. But you will have. I'm very confident that people will, with the correct and proper training, they'll be able to handle a 9mm round. But again, this is why, both of us are on this podcast. We want to, provide different perspectives. We do not just want to say, oh, you should do this. It's, we all have our different opinions. But that's two different people, two different opinions. So do your own research though. Make sure that you're getting what you feel that you need.
It really depends on each person and what they're looking to do, right? If you're running something like a subcompact, or you really need to run a micro compact, it may be a lot easier for you to shoot a 380 accurately than you would a 9mm, especially if you're talking like a hotter round, or round that has a bit more powder behind it, in getting the best results. At the end of the day, this is buying a gun, carrying a gun. They're very, very personal things. What works for me may not work for Jim. What works for Jim may not work for me. Interestingly enough, we do carry the same. Our concealed carry gun is the same gun. We both came to that conclusion. Which is really funny that we're having this conversation, because we do carry the same gun chamber and the same round. But with that being said, I think prior to that gun coming onto the market, Jim's concealed carry would have been very different from mine. I was carrying a CZ Rami for a number of years prior to picking up the P365X Macro Comp, which is what we both carry today. But, before that, I was carrying, it would be considered a micro compact. It has a 3.1 inch barrel, and it is a double action, single action, micro compact that has a quasi double stack magazine with it, and it's completely made out of metal. And I loved it because it basically had the same grip width as my P229, so I could shoot that thing really, really well without the same barrel length that I had in my SIG P229. So and I carried the P229 for a very, very long time as well. I just for instances of wearing shorts or t-shirts or whatever the case was, the Rami really, really shined there. I didn't print, and it was just super, super comfortable to sit down with that gun. So I was like, hey, I'm just going to carry this guy all the time. But that's kind of the evolution of a lot of concealed carry owners, is you get what you actually think you want. Then as you try new things, you're like, oh, well, I think this works better. And then you get that.
What's funny is, Marvin, just as you were talking, I thought of another kind of thing to consider. You mentioned the 229, right? So the 229, it's an all-metal gun, right? So it's a compact, but it's all metal, versus the 365, subcompact / micro compact, depending on which flavor you get, but it's polymer, right?
Yep.
So and then Glock's polymer, SIG P226, that's a full size all metal, right? So what I'm getting at is the all metal guns. Beretta, CZ, right? There's other options out there as well. These are all things to consider with weight. How heavy is the gun too? Like if you have a full size all metal gun and that you're trying to carry concealed, that's a heavy gun versus a compact or subcompact or micro compact polymer gun. And polymer is just a fancy word for plastic, right? So there's obviously parts on it that are not plastic, the actions and all that. You have a metal slide, but some of the parts are replaced with polymer versus metal. So there's a lot that you will feel in a difference of weight. Plus, when you're having an empty gun versus a loaded gun, right? So you have the weight of the ammo that you have in your magazine. Yeah, so just another thing to consider. Being a person of smaller stature, you may want to consider that as you may not want to carry around a 2-pound gun, with that's fully loaded, right? You might want to have something that's maybe 1.5 pounds. Just another piece of data to consider.
But that, I think, interestingly, that is another big trade-off that we do talk about is how well you shoot that gun, right? So a heavier metal gun will do a little bit more of that work of soaking up the recoil as opposed to a
Right.
polymer gun. And so, if you can't make it out to the range a bunch and you are like, hey, I need the gun to do a bit more of the lifting for me, an all metal gun may not be as comfortable or as nice to carry around all day in your waist. But when the time comes and you actually need to utilize that gun, it's doing some of that work for you. So you're more accurate, right? So again, everybody's situation is different. Everybody needs to consider, hey, what are the things that are meaningful to me and make the appropriate decisions for your personal situation and your defensive scenarios that you may encounter. And it's about taking stock, right? Being honest. Hey, what is more important to me? Comfort, shootability, concealability, whatever the case might be. You can answer that for your personal situation. For me, I'm like, oh yeah, it's fall. I'm starting to wear jackets. You know what? I'm gonna carry a Glock 19 at the 3:00, right? Okay, so real quick, let's touch. We were just talking about 380 versus 9mm versus 45. Let's talk real quick on jacketed hollow point versus full metal jacket. So a lot of people out there will see these as the acronyms JHP versus FMJ. So Jim, thoughts?
Yeah. So Marvin, I know you touched on this a little bit already, talking about making sure that the bullet kind of stays within the intended target versus shooting through and possibly hitting an innocent civilian or innocent bystander or something like that. So it's getting into what is the best round for the situation that you're in. FMJ, full metal jacket, that's your training round, that's your target round. But in terms of defensive ammo, something that you would want to be shooting through your carry gun, that's going to be your jacketed hollow point. And, we're not going to get into, all of the nitty gritty technical specs and aspects of it to describe everything. But jacketed hollow point in general is a round that will harness that energy, and when shooting an intended threat, you're not going to have that overpenetration of that bullet going into another person or an innocent bystander. So it will stay within that threat. It won't do anything, kind of going out and hitting something else. I know I'm repeating myself, but I'm just trying to solidify that point, just in case people are slightly confused.
And if you see any pictures, if you just look up pictures on the internet, right, you'll see that a jacketed hollow point looks like there's a cup in the front of it, and when that hits, something that's full of water, which our bodies are full of water, it opens up like a flower. And so that's how it dumps its energy, because something that is really big and flat, moves a lot slower, and it's kind of like swimming, right? If you move your hands through the water with your hands bladed and pushing it through, versus with your hands open wide and sweeping it through, you can feel that difference. And it's basically the same principle with a bullet that is a jacketed hollow point versus a full metal jacket, or a JHP versus FMJ. So an FMJ would be like your hand bladed, pushing through the water, fingertips first, right, and moving through it real easily. And then a jacketed hollow point would be, you basically with your hand splayed, right, moving it through the water sideways and trying to paddle. So there's that's the difference between JHP and FMJ, and what you're going to see a lot of out there is they'll call jacketed hollow points, JHPs, defense rounds, critical duty rounds, defense rounds, things like that. And so the other thing that you're going to notice is the price. So jacketed hollow point rounds are fantastically more expensive than full metal jacket, right? So your full metal jacket, probably buying a box of 50 today for anywhere between 13 and 15 bucks. And you're buying a box of 20 for probably
close to 20
bucks.
25.
Yeah, 25 bucks. Yeah. So you're talking like what, 13 cents around
cents,
versus $1 around.
Mm-hmm. But that's the here we go again. That's the trade-off, right? Of having quality defensive rounds, quality jacketed hollow point rounds. Something else that strongly encourage is that you don't just buy your defensive ammo or the ammo that you are going to be using in your carry situation. We strongly encourage you to fire at least a box a year through that gun to keep things cycling well. Keep remembering that there is going to be a difference between how that round feels coming out of the gun versus what your training ammo is going to be. There is a little bit of a way to mitigate that, and that's by having as similar grain weights as possible to that, like from the JHP to the FMJ. And what I mean by grain weights is you'll see a lot of, in terms of 9mm, common grain weights are going to be 115 grain, 124 grain, and 147 grain. Now, Marvin, correct me if I'm wrong. I think a lot of the defensive ammo is going to be in the 147-ish grain weight mark.
Yeah, you can buy they're generally 147. You can still get them in 124. But 147 is probably more common.
Yeah, mine, I know for sure mine are 147. I just didn't want to, speak in absolute, right? So, so what I'm trying to say is, so I mostly will shoot 115 and 124, honestly, just because of pricing when it comes to training ammo. But when it comes to defensive ammo, I have the 147, but I also I remember, okay, this is going to fire slightly differently. If you have a red dot on your pistol as well, that's something else you need to just have a little bit of consideration. This is not going to be like, it's shooting, a foot different or anything. But if you're shooting at, 7 to 10 yards, you might have a difference of impact by maybe an inch and a half or so, compared to where your training ammo would be shooting. So just things to, again, consider, and little nuances, right? This is stuff that for a lot of people just maybe glossing over it, but just want to point out that there's going to be some things that you'll want to keep an eye out on.
And my personal philosophy is that I cycle all of my defensive ammo on an annual basis. So every year I will take all of my defensive ammo and I will shoot it out of my guns and I'll replace it with fresh. Reason for that would be you're carrying it, it's next to your body, you have salt, you have sweat, you have dust, you have all of this stuff that is going in and out of you in it's also getting on your gun, it's getting into your magazine, it's all of these things. I've known people, this hasn't happened to me, I'm not a big sweater, but I've known people who've had discoloration, their rounds have discolored. You can see when copper starts to tarnish. It gets darker, or it might get a green tinge on it. And so just to avoid all of those issues, I shoot all of my defensive ammo out of my guns once a year, just replace it all. If you can afford to do that, go ahead and do that. If you can't afford to do that, then consider, just shooting all the ones that's in the magazines that you've got loaded. If you have one magazine that you're just carrying every single day, just shoot that magazine out and replace it with the other ammo that you might have. You buy them in boxes of 20. Your magazine is anywhere between, potentially 7 and 15 rounds. If you shoot out a 7-round magazine, you've still got 13 rounds of fresh ammo. So go ahead and replace all of that. And you're buying new defensive ammo every 3 years. And hopefully that's not too much to break the bank. $20 for a box of defensive ammo hopefully isn't going to break you.
Yeah, just get a couple less coffees out,
Yeah.
just trade a couple coffees in for, a box of ammo a year.
All right. So let's move into something that a lot of people, this is pretty controversial for a lot of gun owners. So we're going to do a twofer. So it's Israeli carry, which is carrying without one in the chamber, versus your standard carry, which is one in the chamber, and then carrying a gun that has a safety versus a gun that doesn't have a safety. And when I mean a safety, I'm talking about a manual safety. I'm not talking about, say, a Glock trigger safety. I'm talking like this is a safety that you have to actuate, flip on and off with your, primary hand, or, hopefully you don't have to do this, is flip it off with your support hand.
Okay, so going a little bit out of order, the safety versus non-safety thing is actually, it depends on what state you're in, because there are certain states in the country that have requirements of a safety device needing to be on the pistol. So it's, every gun does have some sort of safety mechanism, whether it's an internal safety, external safety, but there are certain states that have a little bit stricter of laws with how it's represented in their laws. So just make sure that if you're in a more restrictive state, or even, honestly, not even just a restrictive state, you should be responsible in whatever state you live in of understanding what kind of gun laws there are. But in terms of if you don't have to have an external safety, that's going to be a question that you're going to have to ask yourself, something that you need to flip on or off in order to make the gun ready to fire.
Yeah, and some people just aren't necessarily comfortable with a gun that doesn't have an external safety. And by external safety, I mean something that you have to actuate with your thumb versus what Glock has, which is a trigger safety. You're basically defeating that safety every time you're about to pull that trigger. That safety basically just doesn't allow that gun to fire unless you're actually pulling the trigger. I will say that when I first started carrying, I was not 100% comfortable with the Glock trigger safety myself, and so I ended up carrying, like I said, PG-29, a double action, single action pistol for a number of years, and that had no safety. You can buy, 1911 style guns where you have to, defeat a thumb actuated safety. Sometimes you can also find guns where they have a beaver tail safety. You have to grip that gun and get a good grip, and then that is one safety. With just you gripping that gun and compressing a physical like lever on the grip of the gun, and then you also have to flip that off. It kind of depends on what you're comfortable with. Again, we were talking about trade-offs again, is if you have a safety, you should train a lot to defeat that safety. You want that muscle memory there so that when you draw that gun, you are unconsciously flicking that safety off, so that when you bring that gun up and you need to pull that trigger, you're getting a bang instead of a click. I think that's the big piece for a lot of people who are like, yeah, I want to buy a gun with a safety. okay, how often are you going to the range? How often are you training, even dry fire, drawing that pistol and defeating that safety? Is that something that you're doing consciously? Do you have to think about it? That couple of seconds could be the difference between life and death, right? So I would say consider your own situation and make a decision on that. But if you make a decision one way or the other, make sure that you're conducting the appropriate training and you're doing the appropriate things to account for the decision that you've made, whether it's a safety or not on that gun. And a lot of guns today do have safeties. You can buy Glocks that have safeties on them. You can buy SIGs, P320s that have safeties on them. You can certainly buy single action P229s and P226s that have safeties on them. Berettas have safeties on them. I think almost every major manufacturer with any of their flagship models produce a version with a safety out there.
Yeah, and Marvin, I know you mentioned the phrase, seconds matter, right? So, or seconds count. So that kind of leads into the Israeli carry versus having one in the chamber. And, people are probably thinking, well, what's Israeli carry? So Israeli carry, there's some debate of whether or not it actually is originated with Israel, but it started becoming popularized with the IDF. And what that means is, well, IDF is the Israeli Defense Force. So, what it actually is you have your handgun, you have your fully loaded magazine, and you load that fully loaded magazine into the gun, but you actually do not rack the slide or chamber a round into the chamber, making it a fully loaded and ready to fire gun. What that means is you have the magazine in, and when you're ready to draw, you still need to rack the slide and chamber the round before you fire, versus when you carry one in the chamber, that's pretty self-explanatory. It's whenever you are loading the gun, you chamber the round, you holster it in whatever carry position you want or are deciding to carry in, and then from there, when you draw, you can engage your target, engage the threat. So two different schools of thought, but there are plenty of videos out there that will demonstrate side by side, the same person doing the same drill of what does it mean to lose time in a scenario where you need to engage a target. Of course, it's on a safe range, and they're just kind of demonstrating the extra bit of time that it takes to chamber around with Israeli carry. But will that time be a matter of again, life and death in a tragic situation, right? So it's something that you should wrestle with in your head, figure out what do you want to train with, what do you want to do. Personally, I do not recommend Israeli carry. I just feel that, again, it all comes down to training. It all comes down to having good instructors. It all comes down to repetition. It all comes down to how much time are you putting into investing into your life. So I will say that I believe carrying with one in the chamber is the best way to engage in carrying concealed. However, if you have a little bit of that fear, kind of like what Marvin was saying, with engaging safeties, if you have that fear of carrying with one in the chamber, if you are not quite certain yet, okay. But just keep in mind that you will want to make sure that when you draw and that pull of the trigger goes click, that means that you didn't rack the slide and chamber around before engaging the target.
I absolutely agree with you, Jim. And I don't think I've ever carried Israeli myself. I'm trying to think. Was there any instances in the military where we had been required to carry Israeli? And I don't think I'd ever carried Israeli, even when I was in the Marines. But I will play the devil's advocate for one quick minute and say, hey, there are a few instances in my mind where I had considered it as a new father. Somebody who has a baby on his hip constantly, it could be a consideration where, hey, if I've got a kid on me and I've got to carry them, and that gun could come loose. Normally you don't have anything on your hip. You shouldn't have anything that is kicking around your waistband area. But when you are a parent, that is potential. And if that gun comes loose and you are around other kids or whatever the case might be, Israeli carry might be a good alternative for you. Additionally, if you are in a scenario where that might happen and somebody who doesn't have great intentions might pick up that gun, that might also be a good alternative for you. But those are very unique situations. And if you have a kid and they're kicking around, maybe you carry at your 3 o'clock and you hold your kid at 11:30 instead of, but that's just my devil's advocate bit right there for Israeli versus one in the chamber. And then as for safety versus no safety, having been in the military, the United States government requires all weapons to have a manual safety, and so that was just something that I spent a lot of time defeating while I was in the Marines. I did get my pistol qualification, and at that time we were shooting the M9, and that safety really sucked to defeat. But we worked really hard to get that muscle memory, and so absolutely, if you feel that is what you need, go ahead and get it. But make sure you're training to overcome that safety. Next would be carry position. So a lot of different places to carry your gun. I personally carry at the 12 o'clock appendix. What about you, Jim?
Yeah, I was actually laughing a little bit inside when you were starting to say the different carry positions earlier, and I'm like, oh yeah, we're gonna get to that. So first off, before we get into all of the positions and such, so when we talk about 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock, this might sound a little bit intuitive, but just for those who may not quite grasp it yet, so when we're referring to those numbers, think of your body as a clock. So when you're facing front, you're facing 12 o'clock. On your right side is 3 o'clock. Directly behind you is 6 o'clock. To your left side is 9 o'clock. So when we're talking about these different carry positions, it's where is that carry position in terms of your body, on that clock spectrum. So Marvin just mentioned 12 o'clock appendix carry because it's literally, 12 o'clock right in front of where your appendix is on your person. So Marvin carries appendix. I also carry appendix as well, and that's been a little bit of an evolution. So I started carrying at 3 o'clock, so on my right hip, changed a little bit to like 3:30, 4 o'clock, just to try to figure out, what feels comfortable. There's a lot of body mechanics that come into this too. So it depends on, your body size, your type, again, it also comes down to your style of clothing. So there's a lot of different factors that come into play here. Personally, I started in the 3 o'clock to 3:30-ish. And then I made the jump. I was like, you know what? I'm hearing a lot about this appendix carry. I see that it's kind of gaining popularity and people are finding better holsters. People are creating newer holsters, and there's some really great companies out there that are putting out great appendix carry rigs, which is great. And I bit the bullet, no pun intended, to make a purchase and get one of those appendix carry holsters for inside the waistband. And I have not gone back to any other carry position. I think it's the best feel for my body style. I think it's the best feel for making a draw and presenting onto target in terms of a concealed carry scenario. So when I'm working on my drills, I know that what I need to do in order to overcome the shirt that is covering the holster, and then drawing and presenting out my firearm at the target. So Always important. Again, practice, 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 and you need to practice the correct mechanics.
I think that's probably pretty much the same reason why I decided to carry appendix, but I did all of my research and I came to that before I had to buy a holster. And so I made the decision to buy an appendix holster from the get go. Like I said, with my time in the Marines, I had carried whenever I did carry a pistol, it was always at my 3 o'clock because we carried either it was a drop holster or those old school green flap holsters. We carried them at 3 o'clock, and it really does telegraph when you're going to go draw your gun. If you're thinking about like those old school cowboy movies where the cowboy starts to go draw his gun, he shifts his body to go reach for that gun at his 3 o'clock, versus where if the gun is carried in appendix, your hands are naturally going to be in front of you, and they're basically just coming closer to your body. And as you watch some people who are more skilled at this do this, they don't telegraph. You don't know that they're going to draw the gun until the gun is out. And it's the same thing that goes for 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock, in my opinion, is that you're doing a lot of telegraphing, and you're also having to defeat your clothing in a way that isn't necessarily natural or easy for you. You have to lift your shirt to get to your pistol. And so with appendix, both of my hands are pretty much in the same place, and I'm pulling my shirt in one direction, up, and I'm pulling my pistol with my other hand. When you're talking about 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock, I'm having to manipulate that shirt in a way that's not as natural as appendix. And in some instances, you may have to manipulate your shirt with your strong hand before you manipulate your gun. And I think that's just that's time lost. And that's also time telling somebody that, hey, this person's got a gun. The one instance that really changed my mind on this issue was watching the video of the White Settlement church shooting in Texas. That video changed my mind forever on where I would be carrying. Unfortunately, during that shooting, there was one security, I believe he was a security associate at that church, and he was wearing a suit, and he had a jacket, and he was carrying 6 o'clock. And you can watch in that video as he's going for his gun, the shooter unfortunately shoots and kills him before he's able to even clear his cover garment. I truly believe that if he was carrying appendix, that he would have been able to produce that firearm before that shooter would have been able to raise that shotgun and kill him. I also ask a lot of people when they say, "Hey, I want to carry concealed. What should I do?" My ask is, when you're trying to diffuse a situation and you're trying to calm somebody down, where are your hands? Your hands are out in front of you. Your hands are out in front of you, and they're empty, and you're basically in this stop motion, right? And you're trying to tell them, "Hey, please calm down. Let's not get into an altercation. Stay. Even if you're saying back up, right? That is the back up motion. You have your hands out in front of you, and you're saying back up, back up." And so it is a much shorter distance for your hands to go from that position to your appendix than it is for your hands to go out to the side at 3 o'clock or all the way around to 6 o'clock. So that's just my personal approach to it. Those are the things that I always ask anybody who's saying, "Hey, I'm looking to carry concealed. What should I be looking for?" There's no doubt in my mind that appendix carry is the best place to carry. The final thing that I'll leave with is how easily is it for you to control that gun? So if somebody tries to take that gun from you, either they want to pull it out of your holster or they want to prevent you from being able to draw that gun. What position on your body are you going to be most able to control that firearm? And I believe it is appendix, because it is in front of you. You can see it, right? And you are in the strongest position if you are trying to control their limbs or trying to keep them away. Your hands are in front of you. That's where your arms are going to be the strongest. If you're trying to shift your arms and you're trying to control somebody at your 3 o'clock, or you can't control somebody at your 6 o'clock who is trying to take that gun from you, or whatever the case might be, it just makes sense all the way around. But from a concealment standpoint, 6 o'clock is probably the best if people are looking at you head on. Even if that gun is what I like to call cancer in your waistband, it's the least noticeable, like chunk of metal. So there is only one pro to carrying 6 o'clock, but there's so many cons. Same thing for 3 o'clock. I think 3 o'clock, probably there's a comfort level there because you don't have a gun in the front of your waistband. But again, it looks like there's a gun at 3 o'clock. You've got 2.5 inches of metal sticking out the side. So again, that's my approach. Those are my 2 cents.
One thing that I want to point out is we do want to say that we have somebody that's going to be a guest coming on in the next few episodes, and she is going to be a phenomenal person to speak specifically to our female audience. And I mean that from the sense of there are body differences and body shapes and things
and clothing
that females
differences
have to consider, and clothing differences, 100%. So when it's females that are trying to figure out how do we carry, and Marvin and I, we're guys. We're not going to tell women what they can and can't do with carrying and what they should consider and not. There's going to just be certain body limitations, like I said, and then as Marvin said, clothing. So there's. I'm really excited for when we have our guest on to speak of her story and also what what she has encountered in terms of carrying, and then going into more options that women have for carrying concealed. So yeah, it's going to be a great guest. So any women out there that are listening, it's going to be a really powerful episode for you.
All right. I think the next thing that I would like to cover would be training in daily SOP. So training, obviously, we can never harp on this enough. As hey, if you're going to carry concealed, train on your draw stroke. Train on how you are producing that firearm under duress. So you can always get various shot timer apps on your phone and just wait for that beep and see how long it takes for you to pull that gun out. Another great tool for this would be the Mantis X. And so I've personally used the Mantis X for a very long time, and it has a gyroscope in it and basically does everything that we're talking about. Has a shot timer, it'll go beep, and then it'll basically track your movements and tell you what your draw stroke is like, how long it took for you to from that beep to producing that gun to pulling the trigger as a dry fire exercise. And it'll record all that and tell you how fast you did it and whether you were accurate, whether you jerked it, well, all of those things. So that would be one thing from a training standpoint. I think the other thing that I would talk about would be the daily SOP. So every day as you're unholstering that gun, you're going to take that out of your pants at some point. And so how to do that safely. One of the things that you would learn in a concealed carry class is, when you are reholstering your gun, right? Don't do it with the holster in your pants. Remove the holster the gun, make sure there's no obstructions in that holster, and then clip that back into your pants. There are a lot of videos out there where somebody's had a shirt part of their shirt that was trapped in the part of the holster that would cover the trigger well, and as they're reholstering, that part of the shirt gets caught up in the trigger and it depresses that trigger and it goes off. And so, especially if you are carrying appendix, you've potentially got that firearm pointed at some pretty important organs and parts of your body. You do not want that gun going off. And so, one of the things is, if you're producing that gun and you are done doing whatever you need to do with that gun, so it is safe for you to reholster, remove the holster from your pants, reholster that gun, put the holster with the gun in it back in your pants. That way you avoid any kind of negligent discharge. Another thing would be unloading your firearm every night. And whether or not that's something that you'd want to do, I've done both. I've been in a situation where I've unloaded the firearm. I think that if you put the gun into a safe, or if you put it into, something like a nightstand safe, a lockbox, a big gun safe, whatever it might be, you don't need to unload it, right? Because you're keeping that firearm in a safe place. But if you don't have that, or if you're storing it somewhere else, then sure, unload it, unchamber the round. Just remember to drop that magazine, unchamber that round. The other thing that I would say with unchambering or unloading that gun on a daily basis is that's more manipulation of the gun, right? And so that introduces more potential for anything to happen. And so if that's something that you're going to be doing, make sure that you're very comfortable. You're doing it in a very safe way, pointing that gun in a safe direction. All of those great things when considering unloading that firearm every night.
Yeah, one thing that I want to call out, Marvin, I definitely get what you're trying to get at with the removing the holster piece and then holstering the gun and then putting it back in. This also, it's just going to be another plug for training. There are plenty of good, solid concealed carry courses out there. I would have to be certain that there's at least one in your area where you can get practice with your concealed carry setup, and you go through all of these drills that Marvin's talking about. And after time, you will become more comfortable with drawing, presenting, engaging a target, and also reholstering in a drill sense. So maybe if you're starting out, yes, you may want to take that holster out before reholstering. But don't think that it's a forever thing, because with training, with repetition, with the ability to be on a range with a trained instructor, going by yourself after you have that instruction, you will be able to feel comfortable with that reholstering. So just want to continue to emphasize, we are strongly encouraging people to seek out training. I don't believe we mentioned it specifically in the last couple episodes just because of what the topics were. But we want to make sure shootingclasses.com, it is a really good resource to check out, to search instructors, to search classes. And then again, if you have a local gun shop in your area, call them up, ask them if they have any recommended instructors, do some Googling in your area, see what you can find.
Thanks, Jim. And then I think the last piece for the training that I wanted to touch on would just be, if you haven't gotten out to a training class or whatever the case might be, appropriate distance for drills and, gauge for proficiency. So you can go out and you can get man-sized targets out there at most ranges. I would say within 7 yards and in. You can probably even to start at 3 to 5 yards and see whether you can get all of your rounds inside of that man-sized target. And so just a quick way of gauging, hey, what is my proficiency and what can I do to get better? Outside of, hey, go get trained, go take a class, make sure that you're doing all these things proficiently. So I think this last bit is probably going to be a little bit more fun. Accessories, Jim. So everybody's got their own their thoughts on accessories, and so we'll start with the top two, which would be belt and holsters. What are your thoughts on a good belt and holster, Jim?
Yeah, I'd say there's a couple things to keep in mind when you're looking for a good gun belt. The first one is the width of the belt itself. So it depends on how your pants and pant loops are set up and the width and everything, but you'll be probably looking for something between 1.25 and 1.5 inches wide. Then the second piece is having a good, firm, sturdy material that the belt is actually made out of. There's one company that I really like. I have a couple belts from them. It's called Core Essentials, Kore. And I have one belt that is a leather belt. It's kind of a dressier look. And then the second one is a really sturdy nylon. And it's they're great. And the cool thing about Core is that they have it's like it comes in a one size fits all as sold. So what you do is you cut it down to whatever your size is, of whether it's 30, 32, 34. Like, it's very, very customizable. And then there's micro notches in the belt itself of how minuscule of changes you can make to make it fit perfectly for you. So yeah, I'd recommend that. Try it out, see if you like it, and if not, then you can always do some Googling or asking some other recommendations of people at your local gun shop or other gun owners that do concealed carry.
What about holsters, Jim?
Yeah, so I'll give you a rundown of the ones that I currently use and have used in the past. So the one that I'm currently running, I think I've had it for 3 or 4 years. I'd have to check my order history, but it's a holster from the company A&R Holsters, and it's a great product. I know the head of the company, Alex. He's a great guy. Shoot matches with them, and kind of neat to hear how his product development has evolved over the last several years. I mean, he puts out a lot of different neat things. So great product there. So that's the first one. The second one is a company, Crossbreed Holsters. They got a lot of different options as well. Inside the waistband, outside the waistband. I've tried them, and nothing bad to say about those. It's just I'm always looking to try something different and something new, see what fits. And then the third one is T-Rex arms. So yeah, similar to both the other ones that I mentioned. A lot of different options, different ways to carry and such like that. So those are the ones that I use.
Awesome. And I think my first holster was an A&R holster. I think it's probably one of the few holsters that I have not sold, even after I've discovered other holsters. I currently, I think, run a variety of Vetter holsters. So big fan of the Vetter holsters. A lot of adjustability in terms of cant. So what angle that gun sits in my belt. From a belt standpoint, I think what people should be looking for would probably be something that has a solid polymer core. A lot of the better gun belts out there are leather or nylon, but they in between they've sandwiched a solid polymer core to give it that rigidity, so that when you're pulling that belt out or pulling that gun out of your holster and it's attached to your belt, you're not pulling your pants with it. I think the other piece of it is sagging. So thicker belts with the polymer core, they retain their shape and they don't sag, and they hold their shape and actually hold your pants up in addition to the gun, even when you're carrying a heavier gun. So for belts, I think I'm running a Blue Force gear right now, but I've also looked into Magpul makes some leather ones that look really, really good. and are also, they look like a normal belt. They don't look like a gun belt. My Blue Force gear has that what's called a Cobra buckle. It looks a little bit tactical. It's also gray. Not the most fashionable thing, but again, if you're carrying concealed, then nobody should be looking at your belt anyway. But that belt does not do double duty as a normal person belt.
All right, so now the next topic. This is gonna have some fun little controversy of like, what should people do or not
Let's
do?
do it. Boo!
Weapon-mounted lights.
Throw tomatoes.
Yeah. Weapon-mounted lights. So
we've disagreed on this.
I will say
we've disagreed on this.
I'm sure we will still disagree on it. So I much prefer having a weapon-mounted light. But that being said, I also carry an offhand light in my pocket, so I have both. I know that we have spoken in the home defense episode of you don't want to be pointing your gun at something if you don't know what's there. If you're trying to put a flashlight on your gun and then you're kind of scanning the room to see what's there. I think it's really just the ability to have a good training mindset, and if you know how you're going to react in a certain situation, or at least a good idea of it, if you have the weapon-mounted light, it's completely outside of what your trigger finger's doing, so you don't really run a risk of engaging a target with your support hand activating that switch. So I think that it is a great option for illuminating your environment with both hands on your firearm and having good stability at the same time. Now, that being said, if there's, for whatever reason, maybe your battery dies on that weapon-mounted light, you still have a secondary flashlight that you can have in your back pocket. It's not like it's a big honking, thick flashlight. It's just like a pen light, or maybe a little bit thicker, maybe a half-inch wide. There's 1,000 lumen flashlights out there that illuminate a room very easily too. So I personally like having both. I also train with the weapon-mounted light quite frequently.
My approach is still a little bit different than yours, Jim. A lot of bit different. My approach is that in my experience, weapon-mounted lights are for searching for targets. I'm actively looking for something or somebody, and I'm looking to destroy that target. And so, as a civilian, I don't foresee myself ever having to search for a target if I can get away. My thought is, if I need a light to see them, they'll need a light to see me. And I'm not looking to engage a target if I can avoid engaging a target. And so if I have if I have a weapon-mounted light, that is a completely different situation in my mind than if I didn't. And so if they need a light to see me, that means I can get away without having to engage them, and I can get to safety. So that's my approach. And, I mean, getting into gunfights and low light situations is a dicey proposition regardless. So that's where I'm personally at. I do also carry a light, a handheld light. And so my thought is if there is an absolute situation where I need to illuminate the target to shoot at it, I will do so with my primary hand and my offhand with a handheld light. And so in addition, it just most of the time it adds length to the gun, it adds weight to the gun. It requires me to get a specialized holster that will accommodate a weapon-mounted light. And for all of those reasons, I personally do not carry a weapon-mounted light, but I do understand Jim's perspective, and I know that that is the perspective that a lot of people also have. I think it's especially important if you are in law enforcement. I mean, I don't think that there should be any situation where a law enforcement officer doesn't have a weapon-mounted light because you're looking to engage a bad guy. You're looking to eliminate a threat, and it isn't about you getting away safely. It is about you protecting the safety of others and protecting society at large. And so for law enforcement, I think weapon-mounted lights make a lot of sense. In the military, obviously makes a lot of sense. Being in the infantry, the mission of the infantry is to locate, close with, and destroy the enemy, and you do that with a weapon-mounted light. As a civilian, I'm not looking to locate, close with, and destroy the enemy. I am looking to get home safely to my family as much as possible. And so that's my perspective on weapon-mounted lights.
Yeah, really the only counter that I have to that off the top of my head is if you have a weapon-mounted light on your handgun, you're able to use your non-shooting hand, your non-dominant hand, your support hand, whatever you want to call it. It's free to do something else. So if you need to grab your son or your daughter's hand or help get your wife out of bed or open a door or something like that, right? Like you're able to do that all while having a little bit of light shining from the light on your handgun. Now, of course, safety rules 100% apply even more, in this situation where you need to be careful of what you're doing, what's happening. So just another emphasis on safety. But here we go. It's everything's a compromise, and it depends.
It is.
It's like the theme of the episode, right?
Theme of this episode. Red dots.
Yeah. So I think this is another hot topic in the industry, and another hot topic of people who want to conceal carry or not. I highly, highly encourage red dots. I actually didn't start shooting red dots until about, we're in 2024 now. I think it was about 3 years ago. So I had been shooting for about nine or 10 years at that point, and I was still shooting irons. So I just made the jump to red dots about 3 years ago, and I love it. It's so much easier for me to draw, present on target, and acquire that dot to engage the target. I find that I'm much faster at lining up. Now, at the same time, there's plenty of people out there. There are plenty of professional shooters out there that are running production guns without red dots or just running iron sights, and they are faster than I could ever dream of being at shooting iron sights. They would beat me if they're shooting their production iron sight gun and I'm shooting my carry optics with a red dot. I am fully willing to admit that they will beat me in a course of fire. They train a whole lot more, and that's the way it is. They're very comfortable with that platform. In terms of the everyday person in a defensive scenario, I just think a red dot is the best option. There you have a very clear point of identification. That red dot that is pointing at your target, or sometimes they come in green dots, but they still call them red dots. But yes, it's a red or green dot that is pointing at your target rather than trying to line up three little dots that are your iron sights, or the little U on some of them with that front sight post. I just truly believe that having that is going to help people a lot more. Now, what's the counter? The counter is it's an electronic device. It's a battery. It can fail.
It's glass. It can crack.
Very valid. It's glass. It can crack. If you drop it, it might get off of your zero. So there's things to consider for sure.
Absolutely. I'm 100% with you. I think if you can afford it, do it. I think it opens it up accessibility to more people who don't want to or don't have the time to get into the nuances of shooting with iron sights. It's not easy to shoot with iron sights. I mean, it takes practice, and it's not intuitive. for most people. When you're talking about, you know, you know, like having to line up those sights. You have a fuzzy target, right? And you have a clear front sight post, and you have to line it up with the rear sight reticle. Whether it is two dots, it's a U. You know, you've got funkier things like HK style sights. You've got, you know, all sorts of different types of iron sights out there. And so sometimes it's hard to see. You've got completely blacked out front sight or iron sights that exist on a lot of guns. So there isn't like a visual indicator for people to hone in on. A lot of guns do have white dots or white U's, or, you know, a series of 3 white dots or whatever the case is. But it's not necessarily intuitive for somebody who's never fired a gun before and doesn't have the time or necessarily the inclination to go ahead and get into all of that. So a red dot makes it so much easier. The downsides, to your point, is points of failure. It's an additional point of failure. Batteries, you have to change the battery out. And I think the other piece of it is zeroing. A lot of guns don't come with the red dot on it, and so the gun isn't zeroed with the red dot. And so you go buy a gun, then you got to go buy a red dot, then you got to put the red dot on it, and then you got to go and zero that gun to that red dot. And so finding somebody who's capable of doing that for you, right? Ideally, you know, maybe somebody at the range, one of the RSOs or whatever, could help you out. But that's an additional complication. In terms of red dots, I've been shooting red dots, I think about the same time that you had been, Jim. I got my first dot probably in 2019. No, yeah, 2019 or mid 2020. It was before the COVID lockdown. Got a really good deal on one. There was a police officer who didn't like it. He wanted a different one, and so he was selling his on the cheap. And it was a really nice red dot for half price. And so I said yes. And I
nice.
Went out and I paid him cash, and but I didn't use that red dot on my carry gun. It was not on my carry gun. I used it as a Glock build. I built a Glock that I'd gotten a slide and put it together and put the red dot on it. Looked really cool and high speed, but it was not my carry gun. It wasn't a gun that I was using every single day. I was actually more comfortable shooting irons at that point because I'd been shooting them for so long. So, but with all that being said, if you can afford a red dot and you want to go for it, I highly recommend it. It's a really good way to get you shooting pretty decently, pretty quickly. Next couple are, one is more controversial than the other, but extra magazines and tourniquets. So there are a lot of folks out there who say, hey, if you carry concealed and you're going out there with a gun, you should have at least one extra magazine. Some people say you should have 2 extra magazines. And then there are a lot of people out there who say, hey, you should also carry a tourniquet. I am all for carrying first aid gear on your person, or at least accessible. I carry a first aid kit with a tourniquet in my car, in my wife's car. Do also carry a first aid kit in my diaper bag for my kid. So I mean, I totally get that.
Glad you clarified for your kid.
Well, I mean, it's for anything, but she does like the little bandages, unicorn bandages out of that first aid kit. I think I've carried an extra magazine maybe once or twice, but I mean, my pockets are so full. I've got keys, I've got a knife, I've got a flashlight, I've got my wallet, I've got my cell phone. Cramming an extra magazine, especially if I'm carrying a compact handgun where I've already got 15 rounds. I'm not. Look, this isn't Black Hawk Down. This is my opinion. This isn't Black Hawk Down, right? We're not going out for 3-hour op and then ending up being out for like 2 days. I'm not getting into a protracted gunfight with some bad guys, right? If that's happening, we got bigger problems. Most firearm, related incidents, shootings for civilians. I think ends up being within 7 feet, and usually it's less than 5 rounds. I think it's the average is like 3 rounds. So I mean, when you're talking about 3 rounds, you're talking about 7 feet. I got 15 rounds. That means I've got enough for 5 engagements. Like, and if I'm going to the range and I'm training and I'm being proficient in handling my firearms, am I going to be expending all 15 rounds? And honestly, the other thing in my mind is like, what are the legal implications of expending 15 rounds in an altercation? Is that something that is going to be used against me in a court of law? Oh my gosh, this guy shot this guy 15 times. In this instance. So with those are all of my personal considerations in terms of, hey, do I need to carry an extra magazine? Will there be instances where, hey, do I want to toss an extra magazine in the glove box, or throw it in the diaper bag or something? Sure, maybe, but at the end of the day, a gun with 15 rounds in it, I think is plenty. But if I was carrying something that had less than 15 rounds, so say I'm carrying my CZ Rami, or I'm carrying something where I'm in a restrictive state where I can only carry a 10-round magazine, I may consider carrying more in that instance. But that's my 2 cents. Jim?
All right, so my personal opinion is partially I think it depends on what type, what time of year it is. So there are times in the wintertime where I will put on my holster that allows me to carry an extra magazine. Like if I'm wearing a hoodie, or if I'm wearing like a slightly larger coat, just because of the whole printing / brandishing possibility. Being a smaller stature guy, that's something that I, need to, be a little bit more cognizant about. But, I'm not going to be carrying that setup with an extra magazine in the summertime or the springtime or early fall. It's just not going to be practical for me. That being said, I think it's going to be a really good way to engage when there's a malfunction, right? So if you are finding yourself with a stovepipe, or if you're finding a double feed, everything happens within a split second, right? And like you said, you mentioned that a lot of the statistics show what the distance looks like of engaging in a self-defense scenario. That can have some implications if you need to change magazines, or if you run into a malfunction, right? It is a mechanical device. The firearm, it is a mechanical device, and mechanical devices have possibilities of failure. So not everything is 100% perfect, and there are times where something may go wrong with the mechanical device that you are using. So if there's a double feed, or if there's a stovepipe, you will want to get that magazine out as quickly as possible, clear the malfunction, and insert a new magazine in order to feel confident when you're re-engaging the target. So yes, there are definitely things to consider. Now, how likely is it that you're going to engage a malfunction and in the exact moment that you are in a self-defense scenario? Probably extremely minuscule. And whether or not you have the time to clear that malfunction and then re-engage the target, that's a whole other thing, right? So I have carried, and I do carry with and without a second magazine. It is the mindset of 2 is 1, 1 is none. If I need it, then I have it. If I don't, then what if something bad happens where I needed that second magazine? Again, just comes down to mindset. It comes down to, what am I comfortable with? What's the setup that I like? And I just make sure that I train for both scenarios. And then, when I go and holster up for the day, if I'm going out, I know consciously of what is my setup that I'm using that day. Then when it comes to tourniquet, or I know you mentioned a tourniquet, I forget who said this, or who I heard this from first, but it was comical when he said it, but it also made perfect sense. If you're if you're going out and you have the ability to put a hole in something, you should also be able to take care of that hole, right? So, if you have to engage something in a self-defense scenario, and you run into that where you have disposed of a round and you engage the target, well, having a tourniquet on your person, on your body, is also a way that you can provide that first aid if necessary, if something were to happen. So, yeah, I think it's very important to carry a tourniquet and say that other person had a gun and they engaged as well and they shot you in the arm or the leg. If you didn't have a tourniquet on you, then you would be in a world of trouble if they hit your femoral artery or some other piece of your leg or your arm or something like that where you needed to apply a tourniquet. Now, here's the other thing. Tourniquets are not always needed in every single scenario. There's also other methods of tending to wounds. It's up to you to maybe seek out some of that kind of training and get some first aid training or get some specific training in those kinds of scenarios. Now, we're getting a little bit more advanced, a little bit more intermediate stuff. So again, not something that may be required right away. However, something to consider.
There have been instances where somebody who is engaged in a self-defense shooting ended up producing a tourniquet to aid the person that they had shot. So
exactly.
So I mean,
yep.
Totally get it. Absolutely. I think that pretty much covers it. What is there anything else that we need to touch on, Jim? I think that's pretty much everything that anybody needs to know about concealed carry from a very general kind of touch on everything that they might encounter.
Yeah, so I guess the last thing I'd say is there's a lot that needs to be considered in this, right? So we have a lot of different opinions of, full size versus compact versus subcompact versus micro compact, right? There's all sorts of different sizes of guns. There's, do you do a red dot? Do you not do a red dot? Flashlight, no flashlight. It's, we're trying to give you the basics of, what we've encountered, what we've seen in the industry in the last 10, 12, 15 years. A lot of different considerations. What works best in your scenario is something that you got to figure out for yourself. By no means are we trying to be the source of truth. We just, we're two guys. We've been around the block a little bit here, trying to see what works for us and, things that, we've seen that doesn't work for us. So, I'd say if you have any questions, definitely reach out to us. We have info at buildingthebasicspodcast.com. That's our email address. And then Instagram, Building the Basics Podcast. Our DMs are open. Would love to, connect with you and see if you have any questions, and we'll do our best to answer. But until next time, hope everybody is safe and can get to the range and enjoy some time with your family and friends.